Hi girls, happy June. Welcome to our ninth and final session of Girls Code Club for the 2020 to 2021 year. I just want to take a minute real quick before we get started to say that this has been a very weird but very enjoyable year getting to know all of you. I know not all of you are able to make it to the virtual sessions, so if you have still just been receiving the emails and working on your own and watching the videos, and I don't get a chance to say this during the sessions, it's just been really terrific. So thank you so much for continuing to participate and for coming along and learning with us this year. This month's activity is a pretty open-ended one to round us off. Basically, all we'd like you to do is to create a site using any and all of the skills that you've learned this year to show off what you liked learning the most, how you hope to keep using your skills, hope to keep learning more. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Feel free to be as creative as you'd like. We have some suggestions here that could get you started. But ultimately, we'd just love to see what you've made. So the biggest proposal, I would say, or the biggest direction that we could push you in, just because it does give you a chance to test out all the things you might have really learned and enjoyed, is creating a quiz that you could exchange either with someone else in the group. You could try to use to stump your family and friends who may or may not know anything about this. And certainly myself and Yunji would be more than happy during the virtual sessions to take any of the quizzes that anyone wants. For us, it's a closed book. We can't go look and reference previous handouts, but certainly while you're making it, you can. So we have a couple suggestions here for the different sessions that you would want to reference in order to actually look for how to make maybe a true false question using a checkbox or multiple choice questions using select elements. You also could ask for names or ask questions that are just text fields that people need to enter. And then obviously you're going to want to make sure there's a button to submit the answers. You're going to want to create a JavaScript method on that button, click, which would check each answer for the correct one. And then at the end, add up and give a score. You can do things like change messages based on scores that people get. Obviously, you might not want to say congratulations for someone who gets 1 question out of 8 right, unless it's a really hard quiz and your congratulations is just for making it through. On the second page down here, we have some more details about how you can do the math and add points each time you go and check for an answer. I'm going to skip over the example quiz link for just a second, but then we'll open that up. Some other ideas, if you're not into the notion of making a quiz, you could create a site that teaches us about someone you go and research, a woman in computer science that you find interesting. There's a lot of ways, obviously, you can make a site that would explain that. We've done a couple throughout the year, so you could go back and reference those. But even just including lists of facts, images, videos, you could come up with some way to draw something on an HTML Canvas element that's specific to that. I feel like we probably could draw something outer space related if you did someone like Katie Bauman and her black hole photography. Additionally, you could consider doing some research and creating a site that teaches us about something we didn't cover this year that sounds interesting to you. Could be something about game building if you really liked that lesson, or something we didn't talk about at all, like robotics or different programming languages. There are many. If you go back and you play that memory game where all the different tiles flip that we had in the game session, I know that there were a bunch of languages, including Ruby and Python and other frameworks in there. So if you find something like that interesting, everybody I'm sure would love to hear about it. If you wanted to kind of give us a little website-based presentation using even some of the same skills that were here, just so it's easy to reference between the two. And lastly, I know some of you have already built very lengthy sites with all the skills from each session going all the way down through. Feel free to present that to us like a time capsule going through the whole program, where at the beginning you can say, this is when we only knew how to put images on here. And now here I am at the end with a form that lets me send emails and submit to databases and everything in between. It's also really fun for us just to go back in time and look at those sorts of things. For all of the session number references that you kind of see here throughout all of the parentheses, you can use our Girls Code Club site that has all of the different links on here to all of the sessions. So if you don't have some of the emails anymore, you can always come back in here and open up the PDFs to either copy code or just go check for something. Especially if you're trying to make a quiz to really stump some people, go in there and try to be a little bit tricky and maybe look for some hidden information that people might not have absorbed the first time through. So speaking of quizzes, I will open up the example quiz that's up here, which is one that I made that'll hopefully just give you kind of an idea of what you might want to do. And in a moment, I will talk about the fancy fonts that you can see throughout here, because that's our sort of bonus for this month, is the ability to go look for all of those. So I have this, what have we learned? A Girls Code Club quiz. And it says, after 9 months of hard work, hopefully this quiz will leave you less like this and more like this. I know you all land in this box. I've listened to you answer questions. You got this. So I have then down here 8 questions, some of which have select elements for sort of a multiple choice dropdown, some of which that are a little simpler have a text field. In this case, you can see I gave a hint to say that the attribute that sets the source of an image or a video is 3 lowercase letters. As we talked about before, some of the times that selects are better than text fields is if someone might enter capital letters instead of lowercase, whoops, something like that. And so in this case, hint, you want to be able to say it's 3 lowercase letters so people have at least a better chance of matching exactly what you're going to be checking for. Questions a little bit about databases, a little bit about which language would you expect to find certain characters, another attribute for a button to call a JavaScript function, and another hint to explain exactly how close that needs to be. And then HTML element questions, make sure it always has a friend. And then a checkbox for a true false. And then you have a button. And then down here, I have this div in my case. This is the same as our welcome div that we did once before, several times before, I should say. So in this case, it starts off saying awaiting your score. And then as you maybe answer some questions, let's answer a couple of these and say, how did I do? It's going to change this to say how many I got correct. So if I uncheck that, and I click that again, it's going to change that to this right here. And so the way I would do that, coming back here, this is, you easily can come in and you can go and check the code for this. The form portion of it is going to look very familiar. It's just a series of paragraph tags and then a series of either select elements, text fields, or down at the bottom here, a checkbox, and then a button, and then our div for our score. So that's all going to look very similar to all the way back in session 3 and 4 when we were just doing text fields and select elements and creating things our Mad Lib style about that. But let's talk about how we would do our grading. So in this case, what we need to be able to do is we have all of our questions set up, and then on our button click, we want to call a JavaScript function that has to do a couple of things. The first thing it has to do is check each question and see if whichever they picked or entered or checked was the correct thing. And then we need to add up the number of their correct answers and tell them, because otherwise, if they just click the button and didn't get a correct number of answers, they're going to be very confused as to why they took the time to take your quiz. And then we have a bonus suggestion here, which could be dividing the number of correct answers by the total and actually giving them a grade like they were taking a test in school. That's optional. You also can just tell them how many questions they got so they can go back and keep practicing until they get all of them correct. You would also have the option of doing something, let's say, depending on the number of answers they get correct, you could display different messages to them in here instead of just saying you got blank out of 8 questions correct. It could be if the score is greater than 5, then great job, you got this many out of 8 questions correct. If it was under that, it could say you might need to go study up those sheets a little bit more. I tricked you, etc. So you can have some fun with that. But let's talk about how we would have a sample HTML section content and then a sample JavaScript function for a quiz with just one question. So let's start off very basic. So in our HTML, we do all of our stuff beforehand. We open our HTML tag, we open our body tag, we do all our styles. We maybe introduce our quiz like we have up here, you know, a little bit of a title. And then we dive in, and our first question here is, what does CSS stand for? So I decided to give three possible answers. Hopefully it's pretty clear among these that we have not spent a year learning about cats sleeping soundly, though they do. But let's say we have those three answers, and then we have a button. We give it a value so that it shows, you know, people are supposed to click it when they're ready to go. We have an on-click event, so this is what's going to happen when we click that button. This is our attribute on click. And then we have grade is the function that we've written in JavaScript. So we're good on our HTML, come down in our JavaScript. Now the first thing we have to do, for the most part, when we've done our variables, we've set them equal to the value of an element with some ID that we care about, which we are still going to do. You can obviously see that. But in this case, we can also use variables to hold just actual values that we create and we change that have nothing to do with the form. And that's what we're going to do here for our scoring. So we're going to begin, because obviously before we start checking any questions, they've gotten 0 right because we haven't checked any yet. So we start off with this variable called score and we set it equal to 0. We go in with our very first question. We set the value in the element with the ID question 1, which is right up here. Again, remember, it's got to have an ID if we're going to talk to it from JavaScript. And we set that in a variable called question 1. And then we have to check and we have to say if question 1 equals cascading style sheets, which is the value of one of the choices, hint, the correct choice, then inside of there, we want to change the score and we want to set the score equal to the score plus 1. Now what that's really going to do is just add 1 to that. It's a little bit of a complicated way to do it, but that's the way of saying, so if this is right now 0, we're setting the score equal to 0 plus 1, which is going to give us a score of 1, obviously, which means that if we only have one question and they got it right, their score at the end of here should be 1. The value in the variable called score should be 1. Now for every additional question you'd want to add past this, you would need to add the appropriate HTML. So basically everything that's right here, some kind of introduction to the question, and then some kind of way to capture an answer, whether it's a select element, a text field, a checkbox, etc. Make sure you change the ID. That's important to call out, because if you have a bunch that are all ID question 1, then this is going to get out of hand very, very fast. And then you also will just have to take this and copy and paste it, change all the references to question 1 to be the appropriate new question. And then you can just keep going to do that over and over. You'll change the answer, obviously, to be the second question's correct answer, and so on and so on. And you could do this for as many questions as you want to quiz someone. It could be really the sky is the limit. My quiz ended with 8 because I ran out of good questions, obviously, after 8. Even 8 is a little bit suspect, to be honest, but there we are. Okay, so and then this right here is a little bit of a breakdown about how if you wanted to go a step further, as it mentions up here, and do kind of a bonus, and you wanted to give people a percentage score, then you're really looking at, you take the number of correct answers that they got, and you have the total number of questions that you know. You're going to take 9 or 7 divided by 9, and you're going to get 0.78. In this case, I'm just saying that I'm rounding it to 2 decimal places. And then we're going to multiply that by 100 to get a 78% as our score. So in this case, in JavaScript, that would look like we take our score that we have up here. Great, we get all the way to the end. We've graded 9 different questions. We have some number, in this case, we're saying 7, but however many they got correct. We have a new variable called calculation. We set that equal to that score value variable divided by 9. And then for our percentage, we can actually just carry this right in here. We don't have to worry about doing anything. And we just get the percentage by doing the calculation times 100, which we know right here would give us this. And math.round is just going to make this an even number. It's not going to give us 77.89892, whatever the actual thing would be. I think it's 0.77778. And then in your score inner HTML here, you could modify this to include both the score variable to give this kind of sentence, but then you also could include the percentage variable to tell them what their percentage score was. So lots of options there. Obviously this, just you got blank questions out of 8 correct is the easiest way to go, but I know some of you like to go above and beyond. So if this is not clear, or if you have any questions about this, just reach out and let us know. Didn't want to go too in depth into it in case no one did it, and then obviously it's just a lot of time spent on it. Okay, so let's say you decide between your quiz, or you decide between your research on a concept, or you decide between your Woman in Computer Science that you want to teach us about, or even just your own long site that you're looking to spruce up and walk us through for the last time. In all of those cases, one of the things you might want to do that involves sprucing it up that we haven't really done a lot yet is fonts. So there are a few fonts that we call web safe, which means everything will support them. Everything, you can use them in your CSS and they'll work on a phone, they'll work on a computer, they'll work on a tablet, they'll work pretty much anywhere. That's very convenient, but the fonts are pretty boring, as I'm sure you have found. So we are fortunate that there is a nice, easy way to search through a huge library of fonts that are way more cool, and we can use any of them in CodePen. So the last 2 pages of the handout here just kind of walk through the exact process for doing that. I'm going to walk through it real quick here because I sometimes find it's easier on a video. And then that way, if you do want to go that route, you'll be able to play with those a little bit. And you'll see that my answer section, as well as my questions, as well as my header, includes 2 different fonts that I went and did this same process for. Okay, so step 1, we go to fonts.google.com, which is a page. It's going to look like this. Now you can do a couple different things that are very handy here. First, you can filter by all of these different types. So if you know you want something that looks like someone wrote it by hand, you can limit just to this filter right here, and then you get all of these kind of more sketched out fonts. You also can type something in here, and then all of the fonts will display with what you type. So if your name has a letter you wrote starts with an H, this is a very cool looking H right there. If your name or if some part of what you're going to include in your site starts with a certain letter or has a certain phrase, and you really want to see what it's going to look like in this font you're choosing, you can enter it right in here, and then you'll be able to look through and see. You can also increase the font. So if you know it's going to be gigantic, you can look for that. This also lets you see how things will overlap, if you think it'll go on multiple lines, all that sort of stuff. So you can mess around here for quite a long time. As you can see, there are many fonts. There is no shortage. But let's say that you come in and you decide you really like one of them. You're really happy with it. There's a couple different options here. Some of them, there's bolder options, things like that. But you just like the regular one. So these are our, I'll go back and make sure I'm doing step by step so that this is clear. So you browse all the way through, you've picked what you wanted. For each one you want to use in your project, you're going to go into the fonts page like we just did. And over here, you're going to click this, select this style, and it's going to pop this up here. You can close it unless you're ready to move on from there. But otherwise, you can go in and you can add multiple different fonts. Let's say you like this one as well. Come in, you say select this style too. You can do that for as many as you think you would like to use. You can see again, there's a couple screenshots here that hopefully will be helpful as you go back and forth. So now let's say I've picked my 2 and I feel pretty happy with those. And what I want to do up here is click these 3 squares and a plus sign. I'm going to get this nice little breakdown of the fonts that I picked. It'll let me review them if I wanted to. I can remove them if I add one I don't actually want. But then what I need to do is you'll see this arrow pointing toward everything in this gray box. So everything right here, I want to come in and I want to copy all of that, highlight all of it and copy it. Now you'll remember when we were in CodePen and doing the external scripts for our external JavaScript files and scripts for the emails and for the databases, we had to come into this settings menu right here. Now we clicked before into here for JavaScript and added in here. In this case, we don't need to click into anything. We come in, we click settings right away, and you'll see this section right here that says stuff for open caret head, close caret. Now the head of an HTML file is basically all of the behind the scenes stuff that we don't add in code right here. In this case, that's where we want all of this to go. So you're going to have, it's going to look like this, and you'll see it actually says link, which is one of the ones that, which is what starts this right here. So you're going to go ahead and paste everything that we pulled from over here, just like this. You come in, you're going to say save and close. So now all of those fonts that you selected are available to you in here to use in your CSS as though they were just like this right here. And the last thing that you'll have to pay attention to there is when you come back over here, you'll see they have CSS rules to specify the families, because some of these have multiple words in the name and things like that. They have these very specific ways that you're going to want to invoke them. And in this case, they have this one, they're always going to be in these single quotes, and then they'll have a comma, and then they'll have what they call a fallback. So this is going to be the, if something goes wrong, use this font instead. Cursive just being a style that's going to be a super generic cursive font. So you want to come in here, and then in order to not even have to type it, you can just copy. You come back over here, and then in whatever type of element you want to put this in, you would put that font family line right there instead of doing something like that. And that is how you will get all of those things right there. And now I have my fancy Pacifico font as my header 1, my H1 tag. Okay. And that brings us to the end. So please, as always, reach out and let us know if you have any questions. I look forward to seeing what kind of fun things you come up with to show us, to really sum up and not only show us, but show your family, show your friends, show everybody else what you've learned this year. Because even though it's been a very weird year, it's been a lot of fun to learn with all of you. So thank you again very much. And I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Bye.